Right, tonight we have Parshas Mishpatim, which is a fascinating Parsha, not so much in terms of eventfulness, but a captivating array of mitzvot, many of them in the category of Mishpatim, which is a term that refers generally collectively to civil law, laws of interpersonal interaction, laws of personal injury, torts, commerce, and many related such topics. And the reason I'm elaborating slightly is that I'd like to talk about the subject which many of the Mefarshim draw attention to, the fact that the Parsha begins, if you got the art scroll, Chumash is on page 416, but any Chumash you may have, it's Parshas Mishpatim, chapter 21 in the book of Exodus. It begins, Ve'ela Mishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. These are the ordinances which you shall place before them. So many of the commentators, as I say, take an interest in the way this Parsha is introduced. And what follows, meaning the second and subsequent psukim, are perplexing. Ki sichne eved ivri. When you buy a Hebrew slave, sheish shanim yavod, for 6 years he shall work. And in the 7th he goes free without any further compensation. He doesn't have to buy his freedom. He doesn't have to persuade someone else to ransom him. He goes free chinam. Okay. The irony and the sort of perplexing aspect here is, why does the Torah begin with this subject? Eved Ivri is uncommon for reasons that the Talmud explains. We're talking here about a free person, a Jewish person who chooses to become a slave, or perhaps he is guilty of a crime for which he has to make restitution, and he has no means to make the restitution, and the courts will sell him into slavery in order to compensate his victim. But this is a situation which could not have been that common, and in any case, we're talking about criminality. Later on, the Parsha deals with much more commonplace scenarios. A person is a bailee and he loses the object, or he finds a lost object, or he loses something through his own misfortune. You know, why begin with this kind of rare scenario? I say rare also because it wasn't applicable yet. The law of the Eved Ivri was not yet applicable during the time the Jewish people were in the wilderness, nor would it be applicable for the first 14 years of their entry into the land of Canaan, nor would it be applicable after the tribes in the north were first exiled, because it was only in the rhythm of the Eved Ivri, who works for 6 years, goes free in the 7th year, and the possibility of his remaining in servitude in perpetuity until the 50th year, and then in the Yovel, the Jubilee year, he goes free. All of that was only applicable during a limited time in Jewish history. So, B'kitzur, in brief, the commentaries endeavor to understand, why is this the first mitzvah? So, Alshikh, our friend for the year, my friend for the year that we've been studying week by week, has a novel approach. He says, the Mefarshim understand, Ve'ela Mishpatim, and these are the ordinances which you shall place before them meaning before the Jewish people. And Rashi and other Mefarshim wonder why it says Tasim Lifnehem, which you shall place. Why doesn't it say to give them, or to teach them, or to instruct them? Lifnehem, and Rashi says it means give it to them, to the Jewish people. Don't take a court case to judges who don't judge according to Torah law. Says Alshikh something completely different. Asher tasim lifnehem. Lifnehem refers to place it before the other mishpatim, the other commandments, the other ordinances which are going to be laid out subsequently. The Torah begins with the words, the Parsha begins with the words, these are the ordinances, meaning that relating to the Hebrew slave and the Jewish maidservant, and the fact that the slave works for 6 years, goes free in the 7th, and the maidservant goes free when she reaches maturity, when she reaches puberty, she goes free, and other laws that are specific to this category. These are the laws which you shall place before the other laws, before all of the Mishpatim, which talk about, like I said, lost property, or property which is stolen, or a thief who is convicted of his crime, and he has to make restitution, sometimes multiple restitution, and other cases of bloodshed, of violence, of manslaughter, all kinds of other cases that are, let's say, more practical, more commonplace, more quotidian, more normative than this strange case of Eved Ivri. Put this one first before you deal with the other ones. That's how Alshikh explains it. And he says, why? He says, because a person might well think that when I look at these commandments, I'm saying the ones about the Eved, about the servant, the maid servant, and the male servant. Most of these commandments, he says, generally are hegioni. They're mostly logical. They're mostly sensible commandments. By which I mean that a person in a certain way, or he digs a hole and he doesn't cover the hole, and therefore someone falls into it, or maybe property is broken as a result, or maybe other kind, or a person is having a barbecue. I hope you can still hear me. I'm seeing worrying messages on my screen. Or he's burning his firewood to warm himself, and the fire gets out of hand and it burns down his neighbor's home or his field. These are forms of damage, etc., which are essentially logical, where the Torah says you've got to make restitution. In some cases, it's full damages, in some cases, partial damage. So a person might say, do I really need the Torah to tell me all of these things? I can work it out for myself. Or I can just follow the guidelines of Hammurabi's code or other presently existing legal systems which already exist. That's what a person might think. And when he sees these laws of the Eved Ivri, he might think to himself, you know what? These laws don't seem to be logical. Work for 6 years, he goes free in the 7th year. I mean, why? Why should he, if he buys him in the slave market, then he should be his permanent property. That's how it is in the ancient world. That's how it was until modern times, really, with slavery. Slavery was a lifetime circumstance, sometimes multi-generational as well. The progeny would also be part of that slave caste. And that was the reality of it. I mean, I'm not endorsing it, nor does the Torah endorse it, but it was de rigueur in the ancient world. So it says here, Alshikh, a person might say, the later Mishpatim are logical. I don't really need them. I don't need the Torah to tell me about them. These Mishpatim are not even Mishpatim. They're more in the category of chukim. Remember, a Mishpat is a logical commandment or logical law. Logic in the sense that human intellect or human ingenuity can understand it and maybe would replicate or something quite similar. A chok is a type of law which transcends human understanding, and the Torah has many chukim. So a person might think that these laws relating to the Eved Ivri are more in the category of chukim than mishpatim altogether. Says Alshikh. So that's why the Torah says these are the ones you've got to do first, and he explains why beautifully. He says, the law of the Eved Ivri has some very remarkable, very almost strange provisions. It says that one who acquires a Hebrew slave has acquired a master for himself, because the limitations and the sensitivity which the master must demonstrate in relating to his slave are so limiting that he may wonder of what value is this slave at all. For example, it says that if he has only a limited amount of wine, let's say he has one glass of wine and he would like to have wine and he needs to provide for his servant as well. It says he's got to give the wine to the servant, and he's got to drink water. He's not allowed to say, okay, I'll have the wine, you got water. He's not allowed to do that. If they're traveling, for example, and in the Holiday Inn, they've only have a single room with one bed. So there's not room for two of them in the bed, for argument's sake. He can say, okay, I'll sleep on the bed. The slave is a slave. He'll sleep on the floor. He can't do that. The slave gets the bed. He sleeps on the floor. He's not allowed to instruct his Hebrew slave to take his clothing to the bathhouse or other types of demeaning or unpleasant work. He's not allowed to say he's got to work in a tannery, which is famously malodorous, or certain other professions. He's not allowed to give him that kind of work to do. It's demeaning, it's degrading. If he can't hire someone to do it, then he'll pay by the day or by the hour. He'll have to do it himself. Can't get his Hebrew slave to do that. Why? It's degrading for him. Says, and by the way, the Baalei Musar explained, because if the master sleeps on the floor and the servant sleeps on the bed, the master may not get a good night's sleep, but at least he'll have the satisfaction in knowing that he's fulfilled the law of the Torah. If the master sleeps on the bed and the servant sleeps on the floor, the master will think to himself, well, it's a good thing that I'm the master here. There's only one bed and I've got it. And the slave will sleep on the floor and he'll feel degraded. He will feel the reason I'm on this floor is that I am a second-class citizen. I'm second degree, and therefore I can't even enjoy the same accommodation as my master. Of course, if there are two beds, he's got to give him the bed. But if there's only one bed, then if the master were to sleep in the bed and the slave were to be on the floor, the humiliation of the servant would be intolerable. And therefore the Torah says, if there's only one, then the servant has the superior position. Says that Alshikh, all of these laws would seem to be in the category of a chok, not a mishpat. And therefore he says, these are the Mishpatim. These laws about the Hebrew servant and the Hebrew maidservant, and the fact that a girl who's sold into servitude by her family, again out of poverty or something like that, out of destitution, and when she reaches puberty by the age of 12, let's say, for a girl, and she reaches puberty, then she either goes free or the master or the master's son will marry her. In other words, she cannot be treated in a disdainful way. She cannot be thrown into the street. She cannot be maintained as a household servant beyond the age of 12. All of these laws, says Alshikh, and here's the punchline, are intended to teach us the importance of human dignity. That's why these are the Mishpatim about the servants that go lifneihem, that precede all the other ones. For that, I hope we'll be back at it now with a better record. Yes, so the Alshikh says, just to summarize, that is why this is the introduction to the laws of all the Mishpatim. According to this perspective, we learn from these unusual laws, which were only infrequently came to actuality, but we learn the principle of the importance of human dignity, and that in turn should underlie all of the other mishpatim that describe and regulate our interaction with one another. Okay, I want to get now to another subject, and actually, I say, like I did last week, I believe, Alshikh has a wealth of information on this parasha, and I have chosen to share with you today, in addition, a comment that he says about the quarrel that leads to blows. So this is the Fisticuffs in our title for those who took note of it. So I'm looking here further on in chapter 21, verse 18, Pasuk Yud Ches. So it's on, if you've got the Art Scroll Chumash, it's on page 420. So Pasuk Yud Ches, verse 18. And here the Torah says, V'chi ruvun anashim, when two people struggle, when they strive, they're fighting, they're quarreling, they're fighting. V'hika ishes re'ehu. And this riv, the word riv, suggests an argument. It can be escalated into a fight as well, and that's what's happened here. V'hika ishes re'ehu, and one strikes the other one, be'even, with a rock, or be'egrofa, with his fist. V'lo yamus, but the victim does not die, but v'nafal mishkav, he falls to the ground, or he's injured, and he has to recuperate over a period of time. So if he recovers and he's able to walk about, to return to the rhythm of life, even al mishanto, if he needs to, perhaps it means to different possibilities. Maybe he can walk under his own power, meaning he does not require a walker or a cane. He regains his mobility and he's back. He's fighting fit now. But the assailant has to make restitution. Then the one who struck him is cleared of the death penalty because he didn't cause his death. He recovered. His victim recovered. Rak shivto yitain, but he has to pay for his unemployment. V'rapoy yirapeh, and he has to pay for his, like Rashi says, Unkula says as well, agar asya yishalem. Pay for his doctor bills. Pay for his medical recovery. Now, Alshikh has an approach which he uses many places, and in this week's Parasha, he uses it consistently, and that is to explain, sometimes in a quite a brilliant way, sometimes in a bit more forced way, the sequence, the relevance, the connectedness of one subject, one passage to another. So if you look at the page that we're on, if you've got the same page as me, page 420, so it speaks there about one who strikes another person and he kills him. And then you have a case where he did not lay in wait. It wasn't premeditated, but maybe it was accidental, the manslaughter. And you have another case where he perhaps is like an assassination. And you've got other scenarios, you've got theft and that sort of thing. And then you've got, in our possibility, we just looked at when people quarrel, and it seems the quarrel becomes escalated into a fight, into a fisticuffs, as we said, and one of them is injured, but he recovers from his injury. Okay, that is the background. So let me share with you what Alshikh says about this. He says this little passage of 2 verses is intended to reflect on the verses that preceded it. How did it come about that these people came to blows so that bloodshed resulted earlier, or that there was a person, a kidnapping, or even cursing a parent? Is there striking a parent? Most you must. Striking a parent, a father or a mother, most you must. Also the death penalty. How did those tragic, ghastly consequences come about? So he says that the Torah is now giving a bit of background, a bit of sort of summary, that these most tragic, most egregious outcomes that involve bloodshed and loss of life can start with a simple quarrel, can start with words of anger or words that are insulting or cursing or humiliating. And the victim, wants to give as good as he gets, and it can come to blows, and they can come to a fight, and they can come to an injury as well. Says the Alshikh that the Torah here is telling us an insight into how quarrels can become escalated. And a person might say that, he started it, he insulted me, he cursed me, he accused me, or whatever it might be. I don't hang around in pubs that often, so I'm not frequently witness to these kinds of quarrels, but I think they do happen. And it could happen in a Jewish context as well. So the assailant who is responding to the provocation or to the humiliation may feel justified. He may feel that son of a gun, he got what he deserved. He had it coming to him. So the Torah says that's not acceptable. And meaning that one is not allowed to respond with violence and in that kind of manner. And one who lands the first blow, for example, if he injures his victim, so he has to make restitution. Now, he might say, especially in the context of what we've seen in the previous few verses that we were just summarizing 2 minutes ago, that's talking about bloodshed, talking about loss of life, talking about death, talking about murder or manslaughter. And here, the assailant might say, look, I only punched him, and it's true I bruised him, and it's true that he had to take off a couple of days of work, but he recovered from it. And not only that, but I've paid for his time off of work, and I've paid for the doctors. Gamarnu, I've done my restitution. So says the Torah that even though you've paid for this doctor's bills and you've paid for his unemployment, that's not enough. He says, Lo yinake midinei shamayim. The assailant is not absolved of his responsibilities klape shmaya towards heaven. When the Torah here stipulates the financial implications of his crime, that is to say, the restitution that he must make, that's only between man and his fellow. But what about between man and God? What about to recover? What about the rehabilitation of the assailant klape shmaya regarding his obligation to heaven? So he says that when this man, the victim, is indisposed for a few days, he has to take off time from work, or he's not able to pursue his own business or his own craft, whatever it may be. It's not just that what he missed out on. What about Malechas Shamayim? What about serving God? What about the mitzvos that he would have done, that he wanted to do? He wanted to do maybe Bikur Cholim. Now people are coming to visit him. He wanted to do the mitzvah of visiting the sick, comforting the bereaved, or burying the dead. He wanted to do the mitzvah of Hachnasas Kala, of bringing joy to a bride and a bridegroom. Maybe he wanted to give tzedakah. Maybe he wanted to go to daven with a minyan. Maybe he wanted to say Kaddish. Maybe he wanted to serve God through Torah study. There's so many ways. Maybe he wanted to say a kind word to a friend who is in need, and because he was suffering from the injury from this assailant, he couldn't do it. How many mitzvahs, how many ways in which the victim wanted to serve Hashem and he couldn't do it. So it says that Alshikh, the Torah is alluding to that as well. The Torah says, "V'nikah hamakeh rak shivto yitain." He has only compensated him, meaning the law of the Torah, the law of the courts can only require him to pay for the lost income of the victim. But the lost mitzvahs of the victim, that is between the assailant and Hashem. And he has to do tshuva for that. Maybe he has to provide further restitution in order, let's say, lidei shamayim, even though the courts will not impose it upon him. But that's why that's how Alshikh says, rak shivto yitain. He has only paid for the fact that while he is unemployed or while he's indisposed, he can't earn money during that time. But what about the avodas Hashem, malechas shamayim, which is missing during that time? And he says also, when it says v'rapo yirapeh, I think this is beautiful. V'rapo yirapeh, why the double expression? So, as is well known, this is a common biblical idiom. It is not actually a departure from the norm, but I'm just saying that, at the pshat level, this is the style of the Torah. But at the drash level, we can ask, what is the significance of the double expression, v'rapo yirapeh, he shall surely heal? There's interpretations and halachic ways. Alshikh says like this: v'rapo, he has to pay for the healing of his victim. Yirapeh, he has to heal himself. He has to heal his own nefesh, the assailant who lost self-control because he was provoked, and maybe he was provoked, but even so, to land a blow, to injure another person, and to prevent him, as we said, during the time of his injury from serving Hashem properly. He, the assailant, has to heal himself. He has to go to anger management courses. He has to recognize that he has been a victim of his own, inability to exercise self-control. It says, Kol hamerim yad nikra rasha. Someone who raises his hand against his neighbor, or his friend, or his enemy to strike him, he's called a rasha. We have that Moshe Rabbeinu said, "Vayomer l'rasha lama sakereyecha," because even if just raising your hand or threatening to strike someone, he's already nikra rasha. Says Alshikh, he has to heal himself. He has to heal himself. He has to recognize the gravity of his transgression. I'd like to elaborate on this just a little bit in the minutes we have left. He has to do tshuva, firstly, in terms of what he did to the other person, forgiveness and all of that. But he also has to rehabilitate himself. Because, my friends, a person who gets angry, a person who strikes out in anger, a person who lands a blow, a person who injures someone else deliberately, aggravated assault or what they call it, simple assault is another term, common assault. Such a person has begun to cultivate in himself a habit of anger, of aggression, of violence, of harming others. And once it happens the first time, it can happen more easily the second time, and the third time it can become a pernicious habit. But even once already sets a precedent. He has to work on himself. He has to heal himself. He has to heal himself so that he doesn't become a habitual salient, so that it doesn't become part of his character. We have a remez to this idea. Some of the Meforshim say about Pinchas. Pinchas was given the covenant of peace. Pinchas, we will read about it at the end of Parshas Balak. It's referenced at the beginning of Parshas Pinchas as well, in the summertime, where Pinchas is given his covenant, a reward of my covenant of peace, it says. Why does he need peace? So one of the explanations in it says he needs peace because he's done an act of violence. And once he has acted in a violent manner, it can create within himself an inclination towards that kind of behavior. So I think this is what Alshikh is referring to here as well, when he says, the assailant has to heal himself from that example of loss of self-control, as I said, anger management or something similar. Just say how he finishes here as well, that what about the next couple of verses? How does that fit in terms of the sequence? Again, at the simple level, we don't necessarily have an obvious explanation for the sequence. I'm sure there is a reason why, but Alshikh, as I say, proposes the reason why. So he says that these people are in a fight, and one of them, let's say, is the winner, and one is the loser, although we've explained the winner is also a loser. But the next verse says, if a person has a slave, male or female, and he strikes that slave to the point that the slave dies, he shall surely be avenged. Then the next pasuk, again, apparently not related, if people are quarreling, and while they're fighting, so there's a pregnant woman, and she is struck inadvertently, perhaps, and she miscarries, or maybe she doesn't miscarry, and the Torah says the different possibilities. Says Alshikh that this person who was involved in the first quarrel that we were discussing in greater detail, he may say to his servant, look, you're my servant. You should have stuck up for me. You should have come to my defense. Where were you when I needed you? And he can strike him. Again, he's angry. Now, this could be the victim. It could be the assailant as well, because the assailant was a party to this fight, obviously. So he may also be angry at his slave for not standing up for him. Says Alshikh, his wife may see what happened to the slave, and she may think to herself, well, the next time my bloke gets into a fight, I better be there to protect him, to stand up for him, to help him. So she does get involved in his next fight, and then she is injured, and maybe the injury results in miscarriage, or maybe not. That's how Alshikh explains it. The underlying theme here is that the pattern of quarrel, the pattern, to go back to the beginning, of loss of dignity, of failing to recognize the human dignity within every person, to a great extent, it's the prelude, it's the pretext or the context for so many of the quarrels, the fights, the misfortune, the violence that we see, which is part of the human condition. But the Torah starts off the Parasha with telling us in a way like preempting it, that if we treat everyone that in our circle with respect, with dignity, including even an Eved Ivri that a person may acquire for himself, then so many of the misfortunes misfortune and so many of the quarrels, etc., that are described in this parsha can be averted. So thank you very much. I apologize again for the technological difficulties. Hopefully by next week we'll have it sorted out, but I think at least we're a bit better off this week than last one. So thank you to everyone for joining us. I wish you a good Shabbos.